Big Podcast.
It's Build a Big Podcast, a marketing podcast for podcasters. David Hooper with you. I got a new book. It's coming out next week. If you want it now, it is 99 cents on pre-order. It is called 101 Podcast Episode Templates. I made it easy for you. These are plug and play templates. You basically take your content, throw it into the concepts that I've designed. I tell you why it works. I tell you how to do it. Under $1 right now on Amazon.com. Get it. BigPodcast.com is the website. If you are not familiar with the newsletter that this episode is an audio version of, that newsletter is there. This podcast is there. If you want to subscribe to it, everything is at BigPodcast.com. Let's get to it. Don't look away. That's the message for you this week. That's a message for all of us. There are a lot of happenings in the world right now that are easy to ignore. They're easy to run from. I encourage you to do the opposite of that. Jump into the conversation around these things. You're a podcaster. You've got a platform. Let's start talking about these things, come up with solutions, make the world a better place for all of us. People are hurting. They're looking for community. You provide that via your podcast. I've gotten several messages over the last week or so, and people basically ask this. They say, should I mention blank? Ultimately, that is a decision up to you. But realize whether they say it or not, many of your listeners want you to say something. You are somebody that people are listening to because they respect you. They want your opinion. They want to hear what you have to say about things. They want you to add to the conversation. Sometimes they are listening to you because they do not know how to translate what they are feeling into words. You're a podcaster. You do that. So don't look away from these things. It's scary, and I get that. Sometimes we don't know what to say. I definitely do not know what to say all the time. And by no means do I think that what I'm even saying here is a perfect thing. The newsletter, the podcast, the book, sometimes I put my foot in my mouth. But when something needs to be said, and I think that this is one of those times, something needs to be said, even if it is just to let people know that they are not alone. You've got a platform. I hope you'll join me in using it. Your listeners have secrets. This is a great site. It's called Post Secret Voicemail. You might be familiar with Post Secret. People would send in postcards and they'd have secrets on them. What kind of secrets? I don't know. Look it up, Post Secret. And you can also check out Post Secret Voicemail. This allows people to share anonymous messages to the world. It is a great example of making your audience feel heard. Here's what the creators say. They say, we wanted to humanize interactions instead of just being another profile on a page. We believe you're able to connect more to someone by leaving everything else out and just listening. By adding total anonymity, it allows us to be more honest and open and say things we might not usually say if people knew who we were. I've had so many interesting conversations off air between breaks. You know, I do a show called Music Business Radio, and it goes out a lot of places. A lot of people hear it, especially in my community. Nashville alone, about 30,000 people listen to each episode. In addition to that, it's a very specific audience, meaning that these are musicians, these are people in the record business. So it's a very specific type of people, and that they are geographically located where you are, assuming the guest is in Nashville, and they often are. Also, these people are working with you. And sometimes what is said on the air is not the full story. Not that we're trying to keep secrets or hide anything. Sometimes people just don't feel like putting everything out there for the world to see. But they will have a one-on-one conversation with you, again, in between commercial breaks, when people think the mic is off or know the mic is off. That's when people are honest. People do not want to be exposed. This is why we keep quiet about things that we know we need to speak up about. People don't want to be exposed. They don't want to be judged. This is why we look away. Oh, what would people think if they knew I really thought this way? I want to change that. I think we can throw a little bit more out there than we've been doing. I talked about this maybe a month ago. This is when everything went down with the Podcast Academy. People have thoughts and people are doing things, but we try to keep it a secret. And I especially saw that growing up in the South. Relatives and extended family from small towns. Speaking of a geographic audience where everybody knows each other and they know your business, if you let it out, there would be a lot of situations where people just wouldn't say anything. For example, teenage girl get pregnant, she just disappear. She'd come back 4 or 5 months later. Oh yeah, I was spending the summer with my aunt, spending a semester with my aunt, whatever. It'd send her off somewhere. She'd have a baby. The baby would not be discussed. There are a lot of secrets in the world. And let me be clear on this. I don't think we necessarily need to share everything. Some of you guys are oversharing. I watch your Facebook lives, your Instagrams, you're oversharing. But with that said, I think there is a balance. If you want to hear something that may be how your listeners are feeling or a version of that, check out this site, Post Secret Voicemail. Maybe this is a feature or segment for you to consider with your listeners. It's super easy. All you need to do is set up a voicemail, use those voicemails within your podcast episode. If you do it, let me know. But check this out. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. Everything on this episode is linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. A 3-year podcast promotion strategy. I've linked an interesting Google Doc for you to check out. This is from Sean Puri of the My First Million podcast. 3 years ago, Sean came up with a vision for his podcast. Earlier this month, he looked back on that vision. He's sharing where he is now. This is an example that podcasting success is possible, but it does not happen overnight. A lot of times we jump in and we all see these, what I call white trash wins lotto stories. We see it in the music industry. We see it in the movies. We see it with literally the lottery, where somebody has nothing and then it appears that they have everything. Is that actually true? I can tell you from the music industry, most of the time it is not. We've got a saying, every overnight sensation takes 7 years. So consider that. Just because you have not heard about somebody does not mean that person is not working. And that is certainly the case of My First Million. Maybe right now is the first time you've ever heard of this, but it's a very popular podcast. 3 years ago, there was a vision for it. Sean checks in on that vision 3 years later. It is an interesting read. It is linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. By the way, if you're interested in this topic, the topic of growing your podcast and the behind the scenes of how it is done, you want to listen to the interview series that I'm doing right now. Go a couple episodes back, pretty nice shelf. 3,000 listeners per, that's not bad. Got it up to 30,000 listeners per, at least. Got a 6-figure book deal, a 40-city tour to launch the book. We're talking all about those things on this series. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That has everything. The last couple of episodes are with Joe. The next couple of episodes are with Joe. So definitely check these out. Joe Saul-Sehy of Stacking Benjamins, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I got a tool for you. It feels like a magic eraser for audio. You ever used a magic eraser, Mr. Clean? I don't know what's in that, but it works. Clear Voice AI. It's a cool tool, sort of a combination of Descript and Auphonic, if you use either one of those. It basically cleans up your raw audio and it gives it a little bit of polish. Not only does it make it sound good, it also removes filler words, removes stutters, removes mouth clicks. It's worth a look. You can upload up to 30 minutes of raw audio for free. I've got it linked, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This app will improve your hosting skills. I was skeptical about this. You record yourself giving a speech or hosting a podcast, and it uses AI, artificial intelligence, to analyze your speech and give you advice on how to make it more effective. It includes a 30-day program to make you a better speaker. So far, I'm a few days in. If nothing else, it's given me a lot of data. It measures pacing. It measures common filler words. I've got those graphs linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com if you want to see where I am as far as this process, my pacing. They say I speak fast. Do I? I don't know. Some people say I go too slow. I think it's all the podcasters who are used to listening to everything at 2 times speed. Everything sounds slow then. But sometimes you can get too fast. You know what I'm talking about when you're doing a podcast. At the very end of this, you're going to hear me say, if you want to subscribe, do this. I got 3 buttons for you, blah, blah, blah. I'm comfortable with that. I know those lines, and you got to pull it back. Pull it back. You ever seen musicians play live? They do the same thing. That's why you got a drummer there playing to a click. Got to pull that band back because we get so comfortable with doing something, we start to speed it up. And this happens with all types of performances, not just music, not just podcasting, comedy, plays. You start to lose your timing. You got to go back. Think about who is listening to you. Maybe they're listening to you for the first time. Consider it. This is going to help you. It is an app that will improve your hosting skills. I love it. I will be reporting more on this as the 30 days continues. But for now, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. You will see the graphs that it is giving me. You will see a link to it. Not a bad deal for somebody who wants to be a better host. It's a voice coach, not only helping you in your pacing, your pitch, your filler words, your general delivery. It also works with you on how to tell a better story. They've analyzed a lot of TED Talks. They know what works. They know what doesn't. Put it in an AI program. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Speaking of building a podcast, you got to have a good message. You got to be able to connect with people. But where do you start? This is about how to get your first 100 subscribers. Whether you're looking to grow your podcast, or build a mailing list, or sell a book, we all start with zero. Maybe you know some people who will come to that first show, subscribe to that first podcast, buy that book. But everybody's got that time when you've got 0 subscribers. This is how to build the first 100 subscribers. And I'm not talking about your mother, father, uncle, brother, sister, people who don't really care about what you're doing, just going to give you a pity subscribe. I'm talking about people who really want what it is that you've got. And this is the good news. If you can do 100, you can do 1,000. And this works with anything. Several years ago, I remember getting a royalty check. It was $1,200. This was a monthly check that I got. And I thought to myself, if I can do 1,200 10 times, that's 12,000. That's a pretty nice living. I would be very comfortable making $12,000 a month. So I did. And this was off a book, by the way. I didn't do it with 10 books. I could have done it with 10 books. What it was for me was reaching 10 times as many people. That's what we're talking about. It didn't happen overnight, but it didn't take nearly as long as I initially thought that it would. If you have a plan, you can make this happen. Half of the game is mental. When you break things down into little pieces, it makes big goals possible. And that information, charts, a plan, everything that you need to do to help you do this, it is linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That is it. Have I mentioned the URL yet? Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That's the weekly newsletter that I send out. It goes out every Friday morning. If you want the tools, if you want the strategies, if you want the stories of how people are growing podcasts, how you can grow your podcast, this is the newsletter to get. I've made it easy to read. 2 or 3 minutes, you're going to get what you need. Click on the links that you need to. You'll be good to go. Of course, you can listen to the audio version. I'd prefer that you do both. I've got stuff here that I don't have there. I've got stuff there that I don't have here. Regardless, everything is at bigpodcast.com. Now, here's the part where I'm going to try to slow down. If you want to subscribe to this podcast, Build a Big Podcast, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I've got 3 buttons for you. One for Android, one for iPhone. One is an RSS feed. If you want to be old-fashioned, get the podcast that way. Android, iPhone, or an RSS feed. One click is all it takes. Click on the one you want. You'll never miss an episode of Build a Big Podcast. As I mentioned, I've got the last couple of episodes with Joe Saul-Sehy. Also, more episodes with Joe Saul-Sehy about how he grew his podcast, how he grew it into something that people want to listen to. We talk about the growing pains of the podcast, what he changed, how some people initially rejected that change, but then came around, and also how book publishers came around. These guys wanted to deal with him. He got a 6-figure deal on his book. Explain all of this in the last couple of episodes and the next couple of episodes. Build a Big Podcast is the podcast, and the subscription link, bigpodcast.com/subscribe, will make sure that you do not miss any of it. Thank you for listening. I'm at bigpodcast.com. If you need to get in touch with me, if you've got comments, thoughts, suggestions for future episodes, reach out, man. Don't be afraid. Bigpodcast.com. I'll see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.